I did, buy the book off the shelf. Nobody had told me about it, and there it was. And I took it home and started reading it at the kitchen table. And I think I was still there at 12 midnight.
Picnic was the ark in terms of Australian literature, because everybody had read it, thought, wow, this is a good piece of writing. It's a wonderful story, and what a movie.
So I put it down and I thought, that would make the most fantastic film. And shortly after that, because I was doing morning television at that stage, the producer of the show, of the morning television show, took me to see 3 to Go from Film Australia, and there was Peter Weir's Michael.
A fresh look at the phenomenon of the youth revolution.
I was actually knocked out by it.
All right, let's go!
There was some really typical Peter, completely over-the-top ideas. Why don't we have troops invade Circular Quay?
She'd seen an early film of mine, I think it was Homesdale. I can't see what connection she saw in it. I'm delighted she did, to think that I could handle something like this.
Homesdale really had a marvellous sense of mystery, and I just found it intriguing. I thought that's what Picnic at Hanging Rock needs. It needs somebody who will believe this remarkable story in the first place. And that's when I approached him with the book.
Patricia Lovell had brought it round to me. I mean, I knew who she was. She was a television personality, but that was a very curious knock at my door.
I think Peter did have his doubts about me because he used to always look at me in a strange way, but then he knew that I was a TV lady and he thought I was just a TV lady, and that's what it was.
So I took the book, and in that period in the Australian film industry, in the early 70s, the idea of making a film from a book was really very foreign. It sounded the big time, that's what they do overseas.
So it was like, but can you do it? I mean, in England they could do it, in America they could do it, but can we do it here? So there's some big leaps that people had to take of faith.
So as I say, I read it from cover to cover, was gripped by it, and by the fact it was an unsolved mystery. And I was burning with it. I mean, it was just like electricity through my body. And I was very keen to make it.
I think when he read the book, he realised that I might have something going, because he rang me up and said, when can we do it?
And I said, how do you go about this? I mean, do you have to get rights? I mean, that's how early it was in the revived Australian industry.
And I got such a shock. And I said, well, I think, first of all, we've got to go to Melbourne and meet with Joan Lindsay, and I'll try and get the rights.
Joan Lindsay, a unique individual, no longer with us. She was a woman of refinement, of elegance, a woman from a world as vanished as is the world of the characters in Hanging Rock.
She had a quality which I think has probably almost died out, died with her generation, which made, a real art of small talk, the art of conversation. Felt just talking about ordinary little things was absolutely delightful, and there was something about her, the quality of her focus on you, and just the delicacy of the interchange that was really lovely.
Joan Lindsay was a one-off woman. She was incredible.
I just remember her as being a very sweet, nice, older woman, but very strong. There was a sort of an iron will about her, which was very attractive to be around.
She was married to Sir Darrell Lindsay, and I met her at her wonderful farm out of Melbourne. We went there, Pat Lovell and I, with her publisher, and she was going to approve me or not. So it was strangely an audition, and a director is not used to being auditioned.
She and Peter immediately were soulmates. I could tell the minute we went in there.
I'd been prepped by the publisher who said, don't ask Lady Lindsay whether the story is true or not. Now, the book is introduced by a paragraph that says something like, whether this story is true or not, the characters involved are long since dead, so it hardly seems to matter. So it was obscure and tantalising.
She strongly hints that it's true. You get a feeling. She never says it is, but the way it's written, it has a very strong documentary feel to it.
So I thought, whether I get the job or not, I must ask this question, otherwise it's a bad start, and I have to know. She has to tell me all the secrets.
Peter did ask Joan Lindsay whether it was a true story or not, and she hedged.
And she said, young man, I hope that you do not ask me the question again.
And then sort of mulled over it a bit and said, it's based on fact.
And I said, well, I'll move to another difficult question, and you may tell me that you're not going to answer this. But I said, do you think it's wide open what happened to these girls? I mean, in your mind, Do you think they fell down a hole? Do you think, for example, they were abducted by aliens? And she said, any of the above.
I just saw it all passing before my eyes, like usually lying in bed at night. When I woke up in the morning, I knew exactly what the next bit was going to be. I never had any trouble about what was going to happen. I just knew.
I was fascinated to hear that Joan Lindsay had dreamt the book over a period of, I think it was something incredible, like 4 weeks. And it was so intense an experience that she got up the next morning and written down what she dreamt.
And in the morning, I would go straight up to the little room upstairs, sit on the floor, papers all around me like that, and just write like a demon, because I knew just exactly what was going to happen from the night before. It was almost as if it was before me in a kind of, almost like a film.
She might have fantasised things, but I can imagine, because when you compose music and you're hearing it in your head and you write it down, you work in another state.
Pat sent me a copy of the book, so I read the book, and I read it. I literally read it. I didn't put it down, and I could see the movie as I read the book. And the secret in the adaptation, I suppose, was to work out what to leave out.
I was very aware that this film essentially as a genre was a mystery story, which I read Alfred Hitchcock saying is probably one of the most difficult genres to tackle. And that is probably because the revelation of the solution is generally disappointing. The Butler did it.
If you see a thriller on television, as a writer who's written lots of that sort of stuff, I sit there and I say, now, who's in this cast who really hasn't got any other role but to be the murderer, no matter how skillfully they're drawn? And what are the moments that have been put in that are actually quite erroneous and trivial, and they'll turn out to be the vital clues? So I sit there and annoy my wife by working it all out from those elements. There's nothing like that in Picnic because there isn't a solution.
Peter said to me, look, you know, you're terrific at finding things and creatively. And I said to him, yes, but I don't know the ropes. I really don't know the ropes. And so he suggested that Hal and Jim come in, and I was very happy.
No one had much experience then, but they did have it. They had gone down the road of financing a picture, and they had set up that first feature of mine, The Cars That Ate Paris.
Picnic had been developed to 2 or 3 drafts by the time we were asked to become involved by Peter. Peter said, you know, this is have you read the book? And we hadn't, then we read it and went, oh, wow, that's a great book. And he said, well, you know, I'm working with Pat Lovell and Cliff Green on a screenplay. Do you want to read the screenplay? And we said, yes. And so we read the screenplay, and he said, look, we're having trouble getting the money together. Can you do that? And we said, yes. There were some issues about the sensuality in the film. Hal and I were advocates of that. We knew we had a movie without an ending, and we were sensitive to the fact that Cars That Ate Paris really didn't have an ending either. And so we thought, well, here we go again. And so one of the decisions we made was, well, look, if these girls are going to disappear and we're never going to explain, it would be really great if they were really beautiful and looked fantastic. And so when they disappeared, you go, damn, I miss them. So it was about it, in a sense, as simple as that.
Here was a mystery that was not going to have a solution. So in a sense, it was an extremely dangerous commercial enterprise, despite its low budget in those days, because the audience would be waiting, whether disappointed or not, to find out who did it. Where are they? What happened to those girls?
The nature of film is, if it's any good, it's unique and it's completely different from everything that's gone before. But the only rules you got are based on what's gone before, which is why Americans say, oh, no. Well, no, of course, no one's going to be interested in this film because it's not like anything else before, because that's why they might be. And so its uniqueness was it was completely different.
Peter and Jim went to London and interviewed Dominic Guard, and the original headmistress was to be Vivean Merchant.
I cast Vivean Merchant, who was then married to Harold Pinter, and I'd met her in London. I admired her work anyway, and a number of Pinter filmed plays, and a number of other films. A superb actress, and she seemed just right, and she was happy to do it. Unfortunately, at the very last minute, and I mean, she was in Hong Kong, in a play there, on her way to join us, and we were filming at Martindale Hall in South Australia, and she was due within let's say 10 days, and she became ill and withdrew.
We got a phone call in Adelaide saying, sorry, your leading lady ain't coming. Now, that's about as close to a big problem, as big a problem as a producer's ever going to face.
There was Rachel Roberts, whom I knew from the screen and had admired. She'd been on a short list, I think, anyway. And I looked at her latest picture, which was Murder on the Orient Express, and I thought, oh, she'd be great. Amazingly, she was free, and she joined us, within 2 weeks. And then we went out to film the first scene, and she had to look at the girls.
Well, young ladies, we are indeed fortunate in the weather for our picnic to Hanging Rock.
And she's farewelling them and say, although you're going on your picnic to Hanging Rock,
You may remove your gloves once the drag has passed through Wood End.
there will be no tomboy foolery on the rock, that kind of dialogue. And so we rehearsed. The girls were standing there looking up at her, and they disliked her. And she came to me, and I thought, oh, no, more trouble. This is going to be hell. And she said, would you mind if the girls left the set? I'm perfectly happy if you put a mark up on a C-stand, a bit of tape, because the way they're looking at me with such hatred is throwing me. And I said, right, okay. So the girls were removed, a little bit of tape, and this consummate actress performed perfectly to the tape.
Cinematographers have to work very closely with the actors because we are actually in the front line. I seem to remember Rachel as being fairly aloof towards us. I doubt whether she knew any of our names even by the end of the film.
She made very sure that she didn't build any relationship with the girls, any offset relationship, which I interpreted as being she wanted to stay in character, that she was not these girls' friends. She was their stern, prim, rather sadistic headmistress.
I expect you to be word perfect when I send Miss Lumley in half an hour. Otherwise, I'm afraid I shall have to send you to bed, instead of letting you stay up until the others return from the picnic.
She was what you would expect. I expected, and she certainly lived up to my expectations, of a consummate actress, absolutely professional and dedicated and totally committed to what she was doing.
Watching her work, oh, gee, she was good. She was spot on. And she, like a conductor of the orchestra as the director, I could ask her to slightly vary a performance one way or another, and she would do so. Casting the girls presented a curious kind of challenge in the sense that when we began, naturally in Sydney, which is where the production was located initially, and then going down to Melbourne, the girls were too sophisticated, too worldly, even in 1975. I wanted to really feel that these girls truly were from 1900 and that they weren't knowing. They still had an innocence. It was in Adelaide that we found in casting there that was still the case there, that whether it was to do with their particular family life or the fact that, I remember a lot of them were involved in crafts and learning music. They seemed to be at that particular era in Adelaide more as if they had come from an earlier period.
I had the feeling that Peter thought that perhaps we were too young and inexperienced to really be handled as actors, and that he was looking for qualities in us that we weren't perhaps even aware we possessed.
The person cast brings their persona and melds it with the character and the attributes of the character in the script or book. And so to some extent, you do therefore borrow a little of their personality. And therefore in casting, you're also looking for what qualities they have as a human being.
He was always looking to add some extra dimension, to find something else in them, physically, in their look, in their attitude, in their physicality, the way they moved, the way they sat, the way they talked, the way they looked, to add another dimension, to give them depth.
So I saw Peter and auditioned, screen tested, and was cast. And it had all been agreed. And then a little later I got a call saying that they'd actually decided they'd made a mistake.
I liked her very much, but I didn't think she had this quality that I'd looked for in the girls in Adelaide. She seemed a little, not older, but a little more worldly. And initially that seemed to be a wrong direction to go.
And that they were going to cast Ingrid Mason instead.
We had rehearsals for about 2 weeks before the filming commenced. I remember Peter came to Hal and I and said, look, this is not really working.
Peter came in one day and said, look, it's got to be Anne. It's got to be Anne. Oh my God, what can we do? But it was one of those, got to bite the bullet and do it.
I got a call from Peter saying that he was very sorry and that he'd made a mistake. And would I consider accepting the part back?
I called her back and tested again, as I recall, and began to realise that this quality she had was exactly apropos of the part. That, in other words, Miranda was not like the other girls, and she knew things.
I had to do a huge band-aid on the original girl and did talk her into coming into the film as one of the senior girls.
Somebody had the nerve to send Miss McCraw a card on squared paper covered with tiny sums.
Which I thought was a marvellous thing for her to do.
Anne Lambert had, I would think, the most difficult role in the film. She was playing Miranda, who as a person almost doesn't exist. She's an ethereal character floating through this story, yet she's the lead.
Anne was just that presence all the time. I mean, she became Miranda, and she was Miranda for all of us. I mean, it was very easy to say she's like a Botticelli angel, because she was.
Peter thinking that, he'd cast someone who was, in fact, the character, perhaps, was a little misguided, because I was so different to her. She seemed like such a, natural and loving, warm, kind of sunny, uncomplicated person. And I was so shy and hypersensitive. We were quite different.
To St. Valentine. To St. Valentine.
When I think back to that time, it really was a bit like school, and I hated school. And for the same reasons. People formed little cliques and groups and intense friendships very quickly. And I seemed to be sort of on the outer. They'd all sit in their little groups and chat and gossip and talk about which bloke they liked or whatever, and you'd sort of be there like a bit of a ring-in.
Peter said, I'm worried about Margaret because Sarah committed suicide in the movie, and I'm worried that Margaret has embraced the role so convincingly and so absolutely and immersed herself in it that she may do the unthinkable, to take the step herself. And so that was the sort of volatility of the emotions involved.
She had, in a way, the most difficult role she was playing, that tortured soul, Sarah.
People don't sit on cold steps in the dark unless they're weak in the head.
I thought she did such an interesting character. She made so much out of very little. She didn't go on the picnic, she was there. She had really one theme, which was that she was, in the way a young girl can be, had a crush on Miranda.
Karen Robson was just glorious at that age. She was one of the younger girls, and yet you'd never have known it. She was one of the most worldly young girls I've ever known.
If only we could stay out all night and watch the moon rise.
Karen embodied all of that intelligence and humour and quite high status that Irma has in the story.
Everything about her was just sort of slightly eccentric and yet gorgeous. And you just couldn't take your eyes off her. And she knew it.
I went along, I did the audition. They took some photos of me. They must have sort of thought, oh, maybe she's a possibility. And they told my mother, because I was 13 at the time, well, she'd better go and read the book. Do you have a copy? No. Oh, okay. So my mother went and bought a copy. She went to the kids section of the bookstore because that's where she felt the book would be. And the lady looked at her and said, no, madam, I think you'll find that in the adult section of the bookstore. So I don't know what my parents thought I was getting into.
Miranda, don't go up there, come back!
My favourite scene with her was her counting her Valentine's Day cards. And I don't think I said much to her on that day. She just knew the scene.
I think she sent all those Valentine cards to herself because nobody was going to send her any. And so she had to have most.
With an untrained actor, you really have to pretty rapidly drop a scene that is not natural to them because they don't have the technique to fake it. And so the scenes that she was in were substantially those that she deeply understood. And she did understand a girl who was proud of the fact she had, was so popular, at least as she saw it at that moment.
She got right into the role, she'd pester you with questions and make pronouncements on what people were doing. Offer criticism where it wasn't particularly wanted.
This is very sad. I hope I can actually speak about it. Janie was an angel. I think she gave Marion that quality of sort of sturdiness and being very erudite with those glasses.
She was actually a little like Marion, you know, kind of salt of the earth, straight up. What you see is what you get.
You'd often find her doing what she did in the film. You know, she liked to press flowers and things like that. You know, she was interested in nature.
Who do I miss most when I think about people is Jane, because she was really a beautiful person and she was very kind, and it's just so sad that she died so young. And I think, you know, we all miss her.
I had worked with Cliff Green and Peter Weir before. I'd worked with Cliff on a series called Marion that he wrote for the ABC. And I'd worked with Peter in a series called Luke's Kingdom. I had a sort of an ongoing running part of this rather damaged convict girl. So I guess all of those things probably helped to a degree.
Helen, like Rachel, another superb actor, totally in command of her craft.
What did you say? They found her and she's still alive.
She's really sensational and a pleasure to work with. You know, utterly professional, always prepared, always calm, always ready.
She brought to that film, I think, something that we'll always thank her for, because she was so magnificent. She was never a trouble. She never demanded anything. And as Rachel was full of demands, it was wonderful to have Helen there amongst us.
In Joan Lindsay's book, Mamselle is described as being only 1 or 2 years older than the girls, it appears. Well, I was a few years older than they were. But, I mean, I loved playing Mamselle. She was, in her particularly French way, somewhat of a rebel in the institution.
And she was such a fantastic contrast to Mrs. Appleyard.
The headmistress was a kind of lonely, dried-out, sexless, androgynous sort of creature in Rachel's hands. Not that Rachel was, but she made her that, which, of course, was a perfect contrast to this sort of ripe sensuality of Helen.
She doesn't repress the girls in their romantic ideas and their love of music and dancing, and in their capacity to explore themselves and their own relationship to the world.
I just thought she was the best actor in the country, and I'm pretty close to still feeling like that, particularly that performance she gave.
The scene when I go to visit Irma when she's rescued, found, was quite an intense scene to play.
Jackie was a big star then. I'd worked with her on Alvin Purple.
She was in just about every Aussie movie made around that time, actually.
She was incredibly sexy and vivacious and outgoing and gregarious and had this sort of mad social life and all these mad, fabulous romances, and she was a legend.
She brought a bit of joy into it and a lot of life into it.
We wanted a kind of sexy, exuberant chambermaid, and of course there's no one better in Australia to play that role.
Jackie Weaver's character of the maid could be seen to be one of those comic-like relief characters. I saw her as a commentator upon the sad dilemma these children were in.
Jackie Weaver and Tony Llewellyn-Jones were both, then as now, well-known, highly regarded performers. A delightful combination. That was a case where, when having cast them separately, when they were brought together, I was delighted because you could believe a great deal, and therefore they brought a backstory with them, just the way they were around each other. You sensed you believed that, and I was thrilled with what they did.
I'd never consciously noticed it before. I'd probably driven through that country, but I hadn't noticed it.
There she is, ladies. Hanging rock.
And I can remember the sight of it standing up there with the mist coming down over the top, being remarkably dramatic.
Peter kept saying we could maybe make it in the Blue Mountains, and we were chatting all the way, and then suddenly we came over a rise, and there down below us was this rock. I mean, I'm going strange now, but we both just looked at it and thought, oh, yes.
First impression was, oh, it's kind of lumpier and smaller and less majestic and inspiring than I expected. But then when you get to it and go and walk amongst it, it really is a scary place.
It's just full of all these caverns and corridors, and you can weave your way through the place. I think if you've been there, you could believe anything could happen there and that people could disappear there.
I used to go there when I was a kid. We'd go for picnics and climb all over the rock, but it was only when going back to make picnic at Hanging Rock that I actually became aware of those faces in the rock. And what is fascinating is that they are Aboriginal faces.
It had, you know, without stretching it or without any effort, a mystical quality to it.
Equipment went missing and watches stopped and all of that stuff actually happened.
We were trying to film on the top of the rock, right? And this big storm came. Massive storm. And the wind blew and thunder, lightning, and everyone battened down, and we said, we'll just have to sit this one out. And the storm went right around the rock. We're standing on the rock and you could see the rain pouring down. You could actually see it, but not where we were, you know? And that was a bit freaky, you know?
When he made Cars Paris, he'd literally only made like 2 movies. By movies, I mean short films. Then he made Cars Paris, then Picnic in Hanging Rock. Now, the leap in terms of sophistication, storytelling, command of the medium was gigantic and thrilling to be part of.
Peter's got the ability to collaborate with people to actually inspire them to get the best work out of them, because he's such a calm person with such a great sense of humour and very committed to his film and to his story.
He had a special magic. He had a vocabulary that described things in such a magnificent way that you were just taken by this wonderful, inspirational man that was just simply taking you in areas where nobody had been taken before.
It was 1974 and I was 21 and I worked with Peter Weir and I thought, wow, this is what working with directors is all about. And I've got to be honest with you, I don't think I've worked with anyone better since.
I, like most people, thought, I wouldn't mind directing, and I'd directed a bit. But the moment you stand beside someone like Peter, you go, well, he was born to direct this guy. You know, I could study night and day for the rest of my life and I'll still never be half as good as him.
My observation of the way Peter Weir worked on this film on set, for example, was that he was almost not there. He was certainly no boss director. I mean, one could never imagine him stomping around in jodhpurs and high boots in the 1920s or 30s.
Peter created a terrific atmosphere for actors to work in. He was absolutely focused on the content of a scene, and that was very supportive of actors, particularly if it was a difficult scene.
He tended to keep his distance, and he tended to work with all of us virtually just by creating the atmosphere and behaving towards us as though we were in fact those characters.
To do a movie with a major theatrical star and a group of kids simultaneously, I mean, that's, you know, and to capture it with such finesse, you know, and style. Pretty amazing.
I'd actually worked with Hal on the earlier couple of films that I'd done, and he must have thought I was competent enough to shoot Picnic at Hanging Rock with Peter.
Russell had shot Man from Hong Kong, and I'd first shot a Man from Hong Kong.
Man from Hong Kong and Picnic were as different as chalk and cheese in terms of their scripts, the whole motivation and the whole idea behind it.
But what I learned working with Russell was he was a lovely guy. He was a great cameraman, and he just made everything easy.
Peter realised that he had to have a highly professional cinematographer, and he chose well.
I saw Mike Thornhill's picture Between Wars and thought that the picture was a cut above what anybody was doing. And I was very excited after I saw the picture, knowing I had things coming up and that I would, you know, work hopefully with some of these people. So, you know, certainly, yeah, you know, I got Russell from that. I think Russell's great quality that showed very early on was that he knew how to work exteriors and had an understanding, deep understanding of exterior light. He found a way to make the light diffused.
Russell typically developed a whole range of techniques with muslin on the lens and Vaseline, etc.
He went out and bought all these various weights of bridal veil.
I went into David Jones' wedding department. I think I was the only bloke who'd ever been in there, actually. And I got some sideways glances too, but I asked the shop assistant to have a look at, if I could have a look at some wedding veil material. She must have thought I was nuts, I'm sure. So I selected a certain wedding veil, which is actually probably more like the grading of like a mosquito net. And I bought a couple of yards of that and bolted out the door.
After the film, this is a curious thing, commercials took up the look. And to a degree, you know, I think it's out of fashion now, but for a long period you would see kind of knockoff looks, and that led to it becoming a kind of cliche.
We prioritised every scene all the major sequences in the movie. And we gave them an A, B or a C. And the A scenes, we decided we would spend time shooting, and the B scenes we would spend less time shooting, and the C scenes we would shoot as quickly as we could. A very sensible thing because, for example, the picnic scene became an A scene.
The picnic itself, at the base of the rock, was scheduled for, I think, reasonably off the script, for maybe 1 day's shooting. You see them sitting and reading, and then you see them having a little lunch and looking at things through a little magnifying glass and so on. Then they say, we're going for a walk.
First time we went up the rock and looked at the location for the picnic scene itself, I realised that, you know, only between like 12 o'clock and 1:30 sort of thing, we'd get a perfect light on the rock.
He said at 12 o'clock the light is perfect, and he can silk it out and create a lovely diffused light. But to do that, we would be only able to shoot for 1 hour per day for something like a 5-hour, 6-hour scene.
A light played such an incredibly important part in that film. I felt I couldn't manufacture it. I couldn't even try and recreate that beautiful light that was there for an hour a day.
So they scheduled that hour every day. And it was difficult for the crew because you'd do the hour, then you had to go back to the top of the rock and do something else or go somewhere else. And so it was filmed over that week, and we maintained, therefore, the look.
It was a big ask for me. It was my third movie. I mean, they could have fired me on the spot, saying, no, we'll get somebody else to shoot it all at once. But fortunately, that didn't happen.
It looks magic when you see it on the screen. It really does. It's just got that sense of the Australian bush and that lazy sort of gum-smelling sort of day.
I remember Peter came to Hal and I and said, look, I've got this fellow by the name of Martin Sharp who I'd like to have involved on the film. So we met him, and Martin's knowledge of the book was absolutely encyclopedic.
I was fascinated by the book and saw this sort of other thread of sort of mythology running through it.
A whole kind of structure within the book that was really quite apart from the linear story, and certain sort of mystical connections in it, particularly with Botticelli's Angel and the birth of Venus.
He brought an extra level of finesse to every shot and every prop and every brooch and hat and carriage, etc. that Martin would think, oh, why don't we put that there? That just kind of lifted it.
I just added a few details here and there as best I could.
When Mrs. Appleyard pulls open that drawer and goes for a hip flask, all of those strange little objects in there Martin had put there.
I did a sort of scrapbook for Sarah, which I tried to tell the story as if it was a girl making collage out of Victorian scrap.
It was a prop, and it might get seen in one scene, and I'm not sure whether it ever gets seen at all. But it was just exquisite.
He helped imbue us all with a sense that there are other dimensions and something special about this story that perhaps we could have missed if Martin had not been there.
Everything to do with the imagery, the shell imagery, the swan, the icon of Miranda. He was very connected to that.
I think all my cast and crew love that feeling that comes with me, that I've seen something on the way to work, let's shoot that. You know, there's a dead dog over there, let's drag it into the shot, you know, whatever. Somebody comes in limping and says, God, I just hit my knee. The limp, my God, that's what's been missing from the character. If you haven't filmed it before, you should have a limp, of course. You know, whatever.
It was as though she'd come home. I couldn't believe it. It was wonderful. And the way she spoke to everybody, it was really a wonderful afternoon.
I'd gone under some trees to find some shade while they were doing the next setup. And I heard a voice say, bonjour, mademoiselle. Turned around and there was Joan Lindsay, whom I knew from seeing her photograph. And it was funny that she just kind of picked me, although she probably knew that I was playing the part.
I became aware that there was someone coming after me across this quite rough ground, and it was this little old lady who I just knew had to be Joan. So I stopped and waited for her, and she just came straight up to me and threw her arms around me and held me really hard and right into my ear said, "Oh, Miranda, it's been so long."
She was really very moved and really almost verging on being upset.
When she let me go, I said, "Oh, you know, hello, you must be Joan Lindsay. And she just didn't want to know. She just wanted to be in the moment.
It was as if she saw past the actor playing the role and was talking to the character that she had created.
To try and get to the bottom of where she was connected to those characters was impossible. But you knew she was, and you knew they were close to her.
Something true and profoundly felt is in the story. You know, it's about something that happened to her that even in her old age still carried a terrific punch for her.
Rationalists go, well, there's no ending. Well, that's not no story. Fortunately, they're in the minority, because the majority were just caught up in this mystery and said, it's a fantastic mystery, there may be no solution, that's why it's a great mystery. Because if there was a solution, it's not a great mystery anymore, it's a kind of okay mystery that runs 2 acts and then they solve them the third.
I think one of the beauties of the film is that it remains a mystery. You continue to think about it, to ponder it.
You actually go through the rest of your life subconsciously trying to work it out.
Sometimes the true story aspect bothered me, but Joan Lindsay had not given me the right to say that it was fiction, nor the right to say it was true. So I was, just left speculating curiously like others.
I managed to get all the old newspapers and did read that girls had disappeared, but they were actually found dead somewhere from the rock, and it was earlier than 1900.
A monument to 3 lost children in the district in 1867 seems to foreshadow the events of 1900.
But there are lots of unanswered questions that I couldn't even get from those old newspapers or from Joan.
I don't wish to spoil the mystery. It's written as a mystery, and I always tell these well-meaning people who want to know everything, I just say, well, it was written as a mystery and it remains a mystery, and I'm very sorry.